Welcome to Violent Confrontation Avoidance Training for Educators. My name is Charles Burton. I am the Coordinator of Employee Relations for St. Louis Public Schools. This course is required for all St. Louis Public School employees. You may be asking yourself, what is Violent Confrontation Avoidance Training for Educators? And I'm so glad you asked. Simply put, it is our effort to equip you with the skill set necessary to identify potentially hostile or violent situations, and when appropriate, to de-escalate or to counteract that potentially hostile or violent situation. And lastly, when the situation is out of your control and de-escalation is not an option, to seek support and assistance and to get yourself and those you're responsible for to safety. This course was developed by the St. Louis Public Schools Safety Committee in conjunction with the School Safety Center Foundation, Inc., which is a group out of Mississippi which coordinates its activities with a number of emergency response organizations and law enforcement agencies, including the FBI. The purpose of the course is to make our schools safer at the end of the day, and to reduce the number of employee injuries related to breaking up fights. Schools are not inherently dangerous or violent. However, the violence in our schools is the violence in our communities, and the violence in our communities is the violence in our schools. They feed each other and they feed off of each other in some very real ways. Due to this connection, we determined that part of making our schools safer was ensuring or equipping our staff members with the skill set necessary to deal with potentially hostile or violent individuals. Now, let me be very, very clear about this. Not all parents, students, staff, or members of the community are dangerous. In fact, the vast majority of them are not violent or angry at all. Most of them are very peace-loving people. However, all it takes is one person to disrupt the peace, and we need to be prepared to deal with that individual when they show up, and that's what this class is about. For years, I presented this class face-to-face with new hires, and I began every class by asking this question: do we live in a violent world? And for years, the answer was a resounding yes. In fact, in 4 or 5 years that I taught the class, there was only one person who said we did not live in a violent world, and his name was literally Mr. Virtue, which is funny to me. Nevertheless, notwithstanding Mr. Virtue, I'd ask all the other people in the class, then, well, if we live in a violent world, how many of you have been in a violent confrontation in the last 3 months, 6 months, year, 5 years, 10 years? And the vast majority had not been in a violent confrontation or potentially violent confrontation in quite some time. And I say to you what I say to them, that is both a blessing and a curse. It is good that you don't have to deal with potentially violent or hostile people on a regular basis. The problem is, of course, that if you don't, that there is a challenge that comes with not being prepared or having thought about what happens when that angry person, that angry parent, that angry student is in my face, when they're yelling explicatives at me, when they're closer than I want them to be, when their breath is not as fresh as I want it to be. How do I respond when that angry or hostile person is there trying to push my button? And part of what we want to do in this class is to get you to think about that, so that you have a plan, so that you don't revert to some default that you used back in the 4th grade or the 5th grade, which was the last time some angry or hostile person was in your face. I want you to develop a professional response for a professional and safe environment on how to respond to angry or potentially hostile people.
It's just frustrating. Too many times this has happened at this school and other schools, and nothing's being done. It's like we're not important, like we don't matter.
Reginald F. Lewis High School art teacher Jolita Berry fights back tears as she remembers this incident unfolding in her classroom last Friday. Those aren't students fighting, but that is a student on top of Berry in what she calls a relentless beating, all caught on a cell phone camera. Berry says she told the student to sit down and behave herself, and the rest, well, you can see yourself.
So I looked over because her friends were cheering her on. And before I knew it, she hit me in the face.
Other teachers helped break up the fight, and Barry thought she could turn to her principal for help. But after a little consoling, she felt that the tables were being turned on her.
On one hand, she told me that she is sorry that this happened to me, but then she turned right around and told me that telling a student that I was going to defend myself was a trigger word. I triggered them.
Barry says she and other teachers in her shoes feel that they're at a loss, feeling the schools they teach in are not safe, and now they have the tape to prove it. They just hope that the Baltimore City school system is watching.
No learning place should be this violent.
Wow. I think she's right about at least one thing. Learning communities should not be violent places. Unfortunately, when learning communities are immersed in communities where violence is commonplace in the community, we see spillover, and we have to be prepared to deal with it. And so I want to deal with a couple of things she said, kind of unpack them. The first thing I want to deal with is the fact that she says that she felt like the tables were being turned on her. I want to give you my personal assurance that in St. Louis Public Schools, that if you are a victim of an assault of any kind, that you will not see us turn the tables on you, that you've not been hired to be a punching bag, and it's the district's intent to support you in those kinds of situations. And I should point out, too, that teacher assaults or assaults on teachers are extremely rare, or administrators even. Most of the violence is student-on-student violence, and it's very, very rare that we see a student turn on an adult. But you should know that in the rare case that happens, that the district will support you fully throughout that process. The other thing that she said that I think deserves some time, and I think it's pretty important, is she said that she felt like, well, they told her she used trigger words. Well, if we're honest, there are such things as trigger words, and we have to be really careful about the words we choose and how we say them. Otherwise, we can stir people's passions, and we can get people more excited as opposed to de-escalating situations. And I think there's an example, I think, of a true story which took place in St. Louis Public Schools some years ago of what happens when we're not intentional about the words we use or the body language we use. And the story goes, the safety officer had reported to a school because the teacher had been injured. He was coming to make a report and also to see who the person who perpetrated the assault was, and to take appropriate actions. And when he gets there, there's this big teacher. As every time he tells a story, the teacher gets a little big. But last time he told him, the teacher told the story. The teacher's about 6'3", 320. He's sitting there in the office. He's bent over, sitting in a chair, waiting for some more additional medical attention or for an emergency response vehicle to arrive. He's got his head in his hands. He's got in his hands a bag of ice wrapped in a towel. There's blood on the towel, and sitting about 2 seats over was a little second grade boy whose feet didn't touch the ground. The officer, as he tells the story, he asked, he says, who hurt this big old guy? And of course the secretary says, that little boy over there. And he says, well, how did this little bitty boy hurt that big old guy? And the story goes, as the classroom was transitioning back from the restroom, the little boy was in the back of the line. He started telling a joke. As they arrived to the classroom, the teacher opened the door. As they walked in, the boy reached his punchline, and the class began to laugh. And the teacher said, okay, you've had your fun. Return to your seat. The boy said, nope, you're bored. I'm funny. I'm going to tell another joke. The teacher says, no, hold on, young man. Again, this is my class. I need you to return to your seat so we can move on with our lesson. And the little boy says, begrudgingly, no, once again, I'm not going back to my seat. You boring. Ain't nobody trying to listen to you no more. I'm going to teach, and I'm going to tell another joke. And so the teacher at that point had a choice to make. And the teacher decided to say this. He said, boy, you better sit down or else. Now, I don't know where you're from, but I'm from the west side of St. Louis, born and raised. and or else meant something to this little West Side boy. And so he says, or else what? Little second grade boy. Because I know you ain't going to hit me, because if you do, I'm going to go get my brother, who incidentally happened to be in the fifth grade. And when he gets here, the boy says, we going to handle you. And the teacher's put off. Of course, the class says, oh. And the teacher's, feeling some kind of way. It's like, what's he going to do? Again, he's got a choice to make. Is he going to send him to the office? Is he going to call his parent? Is he going to, And so the teacher says, nope, I got this. He says, boy. He bends over and he gets in his face and gets real close to him, almost face to face. Eyewitnesses put their faces about 3 inches apart. And then he says to the little boy, well, your brother ain't here now. What you gonna do? At which point the little boy took 2 fingers and poked him in the eye. Pow. Wow. What happens? Class erupts, right? They're jumping up and down. They're screaming, oh, snap. Did you see that? Right? The teacher screaming, my eye, my eye, right? Because the class has erupted and they can hear the teacher screaming. The teacher on the right side of the classroom to the right of theirs came out of her classroom into his classroom. The teacher on the left side came out of her classroom into his classroom to see what was going on and how to help. The teacher across the hall came out of her classroom and came in to help. Is anybody teaching? Anybody learning? Maybe the teacher. I know this is a tough one because clearly the little boy is wrong. Clearly the boy ought to be accountable and will be and was held accountable for his conduct. But the question is, beyond that, did this teacher do his job well? And I want us to just know that the language you choose matters, that your body language matters, and that if fear and intimidation is your primary classroom management style, well, you're in trouble. Because the vast majority of the children of this generation, they're not particularly afraid of you. At least not that way. At least not coming from that part of town or immersed in that culture. And that's a challenge. And I'm not trying to stereotype any group of people at all, because I know it takes all kinds to make a world, and there's all kinds of people in the world. But in this present generation, and particularly in places where kids come out and they're immersed in violence, or their communities are immersed in violence regularly, you can't scare them into responding to you with some kind of physical force. I'll say it again, and I've said it before. If fear and intimidation is your classroom management style, you need a new one. And so, the boy was disciplined, yes, but the teacher needs a better approach. The truth is, we have enough bullies on the playground. We don't need bullies in front of the classroom. Speaking of bullying, October is Anti-Bullying Month in St. Louis Public. Is Anti-Bullying Month, and if we're encouraging you to participate in the anti-bullying activities. Additionally, there's an anti-bullying pledge that we ask our students to sign. And the first year we did it, we only had about 1,100 students sign it. The last year I was involved, we had close to 12,000 students sign it. From 1,100 to 12,000, because we're doing a good job of raising awareness around students and bullying. And bullying matters in our district because at the time of the recording of this slide, we deal with about a 40% mobility rate. That is, from students who start school in August, about 40% of them are at a different school, by the time we get to May. And that has to do with, the high level of poverty in our schools. We're looking at about 88.7% free or reduced lunch district-wide, and close to 20% homelessness in our school district. In that context, children move a lot. Well, if you understand anything about bullying, the best defense to bullying is a community of support. Problem is, students who move a lot end up in schools where they don't know anybody on a pretty regular basis, and they don't have that community of support. They're easy targets. So part of your job is to be a support to them, to be a bridge to them, to connect them with other students who might be a support to them first. If you're unable to do that, to be that bridge until they develop the kind of healthy relationship where they have support amongst their peers. Um, but the challenge of that, of course, is if you're a bully in front of the classroom and then they've got bullies on the playground, they're not going to trust you and turn to you. So I need you to keep the high road, not only because it keeps our school safe, not only because it de-escalates, because there are students who are potential targets of bullies who are going to need you as a resource, and they won't use you as a resource if you're a bully too. Domestic, workplace, school, and social violence is on the increase in today's society. It is incumbent on the individual to recognize and be prepared to deal with possibly violent confrontations. By education, background, and training, most education personnel are not trained in methods to assess or deal with potentially violent situations. The primary focus of this course is to provide those professionals with a basic understanding of the nature of anger, how to identify potentially violent individuals, and how to counteract and to de-escalate confrontations or to know when to flee. The course objectives are to identify the two types of anger, recognize the specific causes of emotional, verbal, and physically violent behavior, be aware of and understand the importance of body spacing and parameters when dealing with potentially violent personnel, and demonstrate a knowledge of effectively employing verbal de-escalating techniques when dealing with irritated personnel. Additionally, at the end of this course, staff should be able to identify the dangers and signals associated with kinesthetic body movement and facial expressions, develop skills to proper documentation of violent or potentially violent behavior, be aware of civil liabilities concerning court preparation, and know when it's time to call for assistance or to flee to prevent an attack. This slide contains an abridged list of the reasons why we think it's important to deal with this kind of training with our new hires. I believe they can all be summed up with two words: safety and excellence. We believe that safety is a foundation for all teaching and learning. Before kids can teach, can be taught and learn, we have to put them in a safe environment. Moreover, the district vision is to become a district of excellence. Currently, as I see it, we are a district with pockets of excellence, which are surrounded by a host of challenges. And the goal is to make those pockets of excellence the norm. And in order to do that, safety is a foundation. While not all safe schools are excellent, all excellent schools are safe. And so we do this as we in part to lay a foundation for excellent schools. What is aggression? Aggression is the disposition to behave aggressively. It is a feeling of hostility. It is violent action that is hostile and usually unprovoked. It is the act of initiating hostility. It is being deliberately unfriendly. There are two kinds of aggression that we want to deal with today. The first is primal aggression. The second is cognitive aggression. Primal aggression is a kind of aggression you won't see very often. Nevertheless, it is chemically based, it's neurologically based, it's genetic programming. With primal aggression, this person will show up and they'll be out of control, angry, ready to fight, ready to hurt people when they get there. They are out of control and they are in a place mentally where they are beyond reason. For the most part, you cannot reason with them. My grandmother used to say you can't reason with crazy. And so it's really important once you recognize primal aggression to be clear about your objective. Your objective at that point is not to de-escalate, but to get yourself, any people you're responsible for, to safety and to summon assistance. All right, so you got to get to safety and call for help, and that's it. If you attempt to reason with someone who's dealing with primal aggression, you will not be successful. You'll put yourself in harm's way. So once you recognize that, get yourself and others to safety. Sometimes you want to keep some furniture between you and them as you exit, and also keep an eye on them. Don't turn your back on them. Be really careful about your personal spacing, and then get yourself and the people you're responsible for to safety. And as soon as possible, call for assistance and support. The other kind of aggression that you'll see, and this you'll see far more often than primal aggression, is what we call cognitive aggression. Cognitive aggression is deliberate, it's conscious, it's a learned anger. It has a goal. It's an attempt to manipulate you by being physically threatening, and this you will see far more often than primal aggression. This is in some context. This is the angry father who shows up and says something like, "I need to see Mr. Jones, the gym teacher, right effing now. I need to see the gym teacher, and I need to see the principal right now because my son came home and he had a bruise on his arm." And I said, "Boy, what happened to your arm?" And he said, "Mr. Johnson did it. And so I need to see Mr. Johnson so I can show Mr. Johnson how we deal with such things where I come from." Now, if you're paying attention, or if you've been in this kind of, that this is cognitive aggression, and he hasn't said he's going to hit Mr. Johnson, but his tone, his tenor, his body language, everything suggests aggression, and it's aggression that's designed to do something. And when an angry person is upset or in your presence, the first opportunity to de-escalate is being an active listener. And once you've listened to what they've had to say, to then to respond to what their goal was. In the cases of cognitive aggression, there's always a goal, and this gentleman had a goal. And if you were paying attention, then you know that his goal is, well, lots of people think his goal is to fight Mr. Johnson. That's not his goal. That's part of his strategy. Lots of people think his goal is to confront the principal and Mr. Johnson. Again, that would be part of his strategy, but that's not his goal. His goal at the end of the day is to secure the safety of his son. He just happens to believe that the best way to do that is to intimidate or perhaps even harm Mr. Johnson and the principal, because it's possible, entirely possible, that he comes from a place or a culture where the way that you keep your children or your peers safe is to communicate to anyone who might be a harm to them that this one is protected by me, and that if you mess with them, you have to mess with me. And I don't want to demonize, and I certainly don't want to stereotype anybody either. But when people come from that perspective, the best way to help, again, is not to focus on the strategy, but to focus on the goal. And so this doesn't fix it immediately, but it does open the door or an avenue to communication when someone speaks their goal. And so if his goal really is student safety, and he's not some monster coming just to wreak havoc in your life, but he actually does care about his child and he wants his son to be safe, and he really is doing what he's doing to make his son safe, then you know his goal really is student safety. And you can speak to that. "Oh no, something wrong with Tommy, how is he? Do I need to get a nurse?" Or no, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Let's get to the bottom of this, because I want to make sure your son's safe too. Your son's such a great kid." Something that says you care about what I care about. That's an important part of the conversation, and part of laying a foundation for a healthy conversation. And once again, it doesn't fix everything. It doesn't change everything instantly, but it does create an opportunity for you to begin a dialogue with this person about a common goal or shared interest, which is the safety of his child, and then to begin to work towards a solution. And I guarantee you, while it doesn't fix everything, it does shift the dynamics of the conversation and make it a very real possibility that this could end well. It's a great way to de-escalate. Now, I've got this angry person in front of me. Let's just use the hypothetical we've been using with this angry parent, this angry father. And he is behaving aggressively because he has concerns about the safety of his son. And I've tried to speak to his goal, which is the health and the safety of his son. But now, as I'm engaging in this conversation and I've spoken to his goal, I want to begin to wrestle with the question, what's been his trigger? In this case, seeing the son's bruise. But in any conversation where we're dealing with an angry person, we want to, or a really aggressive person, we want to figure out what's triggered the anger. And in some cases, it's medical. "Ouch, you stepped on my feet," or "Ouch, you stepped on my son's feet," right? Sometimes it's psychologically. "Ouch, you stepped on my feelings," right? And sometimes it's just genetic. They just come from an angry family. They're part of an angry family where there was a family in a neighborhood we used to live in called the Johnsons, and the Johnson was a very tough and aggressive family. And if you fought one Johnson, you had to fight them all because they were all about taking care of each other. And that if you, I think it was Chris Rock who said that if you follow an angry child home and you knock on the door, I bet you somebody angry answers the door. I mean, the apples don't fall from the tree. And so if you've got an angry family like that, family that's easily triggered like that, and a mother that's easily triggered, and father and students and sons that are easily triggered, daughters that are easily triggered, it's really important to recognize that and to be intentional about de-escalating not just the one individual but the group in those situations. If Marco Johnson got into a fight during breakfast, if you didn't de-escalate the rest of the Johnsons by lunch, you were going to have skirmishes all over the playground because that's the way they handled it. And so it's really important when you're dealing with these kinds of triggers to understand their implications in your broader effort to de-escalate. Another trigger can be environmental, and there are communities and cultures where people grow up and live every day, and it is not advantageous. In fact, it's dangerous in their minds for them to appear weak in public. And if part of what you're dealing with is a culture where people have to demonstrate toughness, then if your solution to the problem results in them appearing weak in front of their peers, then it's not a solution they can accept. And part of the challenge of listening and dealing with that is to be able to identify that earlier. And so I'm having this conversation again with this individual. I've tried to speak to try to speak to the situation they're dealing with, try to speak to their goal. Next, I'm trying to identify what has triggered them. And if the trigger is environmental, then it's really important that my solution take other people out of the equation. Because if your solution, once again, requires that they look weak in front of their peers, it's not a solution they can accept. And so the best way to get rid of that is to remove the audience or remove yourself from the audience as you try to engage in the de-escalation conversation. So here we are. We're in this conversation with an angry individual, and I have tried to speak to the goal to keep the person calm and de-escalate the situation. I have assessed what I believe the trigger to be, and I've tried to make sure that my responses don't further exacerbate the concerns raised by the trigger. And then I'm asking myself a question, or I'm doing an analysis. Where am I on the anger continuum? Are we just at the trigger phase where they've just been upset and they've yet to escalate? Or are we at the escalation phase where the person's become increasingly upset or angry? Or are we at the crisis phase where at the crisis phase the person has been triggered, they have not been de-escalated, and they are verbally out of control, that physically they are invading your space, and it is clear that violence is inevitable. And well, if I've reached the crisis phase, then obviously I need to call for help, and I need to get some assistance and some support there, and I need to get myself and the young people I'm responsible for to safety. If we haven't reached the crisis phase, and I'm still escalating, then I want to try to continue in the conversation to maintain a certain level of positivity, to stay connected to the person, verbally, and try to bring the situation down slowly through intentional communications. Again, while I'm having this conversation with this aggressive person, trying to de-escalate, I'm aware of their goal. I've identified the cause of their anger or its primary trigger. I have assessed where I am on the continuum. I feel like I'm in a place where we are de-escalating, and de-escalation is possible, so I'm engaged. I haven't called for help or tried to escape yet. As I'm continuing the conversation, I don't respect the four primary human motivators that are always in the room. Money is always in the room and part of the conversation. Whether a student has lost property, where a parent has lost property, or a parent has had to leave work to come to school, money's in the room. and it's important to respect that and the way it impacts other people. Um, the other piece that's in the room is ideology. It's always in the room. This is where I usually pause to have a conversation about kind of the continuum of where parents are, what they believe about the school district, what they believe about you, what they believe about the school district's commitment to children, what they believe, ethically and politically about the role of school. All matters, and it's possible to have a conversation, particularly with a parent, where you have warring ideologies, and you need to be prepared to kind of deal with that. If a parent believes that they're on the end of the spectrum that's to the left, which says where they say things like I, as the parent and the primary educator of my child, because the parent is the first teacher, and as the parent, it is my job to partner with you to help usher my child into the purpose-driven, socially conscious, community-minded, athletic and academically, proficient person that they were made to be, and that parent, is the one who shows up, with their student on the first day of school. They have all of their stuff, their backpack is packed, and they make sure that their student turns in all their homework. They come to parent-teachers conference regularly. They are fully engaged. They remember, the holiday season. They bake cookies for the class. They bring cookies to the class. They volunteer for field trips. They are awesome. Parents are fully engaged and hopeful, and they trust and they value the system, and they believe that the system trusts and values them. And then, on the other end of the spectrum of parents, there's a parent who says things like, you, Mr. Teacher, you are the primary educator of my child, and it is your responsibility to teach them and not mine, because you're the one who went to school. You're the one with a degree. You're the one who's been certified by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to teach. And so why don't you teach and quit calling me and asking me to come up here and help you do your job, because I ain't never called you down to AT&T to ask you to help me do mine. Now, where we get into trouble is we are talking to a parent who's clearly on the right side of the spectrum and believes it is your job to educate their child. But because you've read a book, you've decided you're going to fix them and move them to the left. And so you say things like, well, if you would have, or you need to, or it's your fault, and those kinds of things. All they ever do is escalate situations. All they ever do is make things worse. Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's possible over the course of a healthy relationship to have a conversation or have a series of conversations which help a parent grow into their role as a partner with you in education. And I've seen that happen on more than one occasion with young parents. However, the challenge is you cannot have that conversation when the parent is angry and upset at the school trying to raise a ruckus about something that's gone wrong. You got to have that conversation later at a different time, and it's got to be about how you grow together, not about you trying to fix the parent. But when we do that, we try to fix the parent. We make things worse. We push ourselves further along the continuum, and we cause things to escalate. The other kind of motivator that's in the room, not only is ideology in the room, what they think about you and the district, not only is money in the room, but their conscience is in the room. All people love their children, whether they show it to you or demonstrate it the way you want them to. They love their children, and it's important that you not make their children numbers or students. In fact, even if they love themselves or they act like they don't love themselves, anytime you make them numbers, you arouse some kind of anger or wrath, because nobody wants to be discounted. Nobody wants to be a number. And so it's really important that you not reduce people to numbers. Nobody cares about the other 24 kids you have. They care about the one that's grandma's favorite, that's their own. And then lastly, ego is always in the room, and the best way to get rid of ego is to get rid of the audience. So I'm dealing with this conversation. I've got this angry person in front of me. I've tried to speak to the goal. I've tried to recognize what has triggered them. I've got a sense of where we are on the continuum of anger. I'm respecting the human motivating factors that are in the room, and then I continue. As we continue in the conversation, I also want to recognize that there are some negative personality types that I need to be aware of as I'm having the conversation to make sure I don't fall into a trap. The first negative personality type we need to look for and be concerned about is what many refer to as a Panzer personality type. A Panzer was a tank used in World War II. It was particularly effective at running over things. And there are people who have Panzer type personalities, and they are hard, they are tough, they do not back down or back up. The best example I can think of, and my wife keeps telling me I need a new example, but the best example of this I can think of is Miss Sophia from The Color Purple. If you've ever seen the movie, then you know what I'm talking about. Miss Sophia, says I had to fight my daddy, I had to fight my uncles, I had to fight my brothers, I had to fight my cousins. I love me some Harpo, but I kill him dead, she says. Because in part there's a sense in which the only way she's had success in life or been able to come out on top in life is to be the toughest, baddest, meanest person in the room. And I don't want to demonize Miss Sophia or people who are like Miss Sophia or people who've grown out of Miss Sophia like circumstances. What I do want to say though is clear is that when a Panzer gets into Panzer mode, if you're unable to find common ground within the first 90 to 60 seconds, then you need to terminate that conversation because I guarantee you nothing good's going to come of it. Escalation is inevitable. And you'll, if you're paying attention, if you're in a building long enough, you'll get a sense for who the Panzer students are. You'll get a sense for who the Panzer parents are. And just be really careful. It's not that we have to avoid the issues or run from the issues, but we do need to recognize the issues and address them as we move forward. Another negative personality type that we have to be particularly aware of is the personality type known as the snake. The snake will take and twist your words and use them against you. And so it's important that you have a couple of things in mind anytime you're talking with someone. The first thing is you want to always assume you're being recorded. In this day and age, everyone has a cell phone. Everyone has all their cell phones or most of their cell phones have cameras and recording devices. And you ought to assume you're being recorded and only say things that you don't mind repeating or things that you believe you could be able to defend appropriately later. The other thing that we do for snakes is we only say things about people that we would say if that person were standing right there. And that way we avoid the gossip and the lies and the mischief that often come with storytelling in the workplace. So you want to choose your words carefully as you're telling. It's also really important, again, when you're negotiating or dealing with an angry parent or an angry student, that you're really intentional about not over-promising. Because, again, the snake will take your over-promise and use it against you. And then the last thing we do for snakes, and this is really important, is that we document. You want to write down what happens. You want to know when, where, and how. When we do this in orientation, we often have a sample memo, and the purpose of the sample memo is to come to grips with what it is we need to document. We need to document the who, what, the when, and the why as best possible. Another negative personality type we have to deal with regularly is what they call Eeyore. This person's just always negative. It doesn't matter how the sun is shining. If it's shining, it's too bright. If it's not shining, it's too dark. It's this person simply turns everything into something negative. This is the person to whom you say, "Ooh, you look nice today," and then they say, "What? I didn't look nice yesterday." They always make everything negative. And with this person, once again, you want to document that, document the communication, and be prepared to deal with any fallout that comes out of their negative misreading of what you've communicated. The last personality type that I want to talk about is we talk about de-escalating these kind of concerns and dealing with the negative personality types. And once again, I've got a negative person, negative, angry, aggressive person in front of me. It could be the angry father we talked about before. It could be It could be a student who's lost some, whose phone is missing and they believe somebody else stole it. It could be any number of things, but they're there. And as I'm talking to them, I wanted to listen to what their goal was for the conversation. Secondly, I wanted to begin to de-escalate that as I understand what the trigger is, what triggered them, and respect that. As I understand the trigger and now know, their intent perhaps to participate with me in de-escalating the situation, then I wanna understand, that and respect the four motivators that are in the room, and then the four human motivators that are always in the room. I also want to have an understanding of the negative personality types that are in the room and respect that and be intentional about what I say as relates to that. And the last one is the clam. This is a negative personality type, which is particularly dangerous, because they just take it, and then suddenly they explode. And we see this a lot with massive school shootings and massive community shootings. There are people who seem really, really calm on the outside, but inside they're bubbling over. And without the appropriate steps to deal with that person can become not only self-destructive but destructive to others. And let me help you too, if I could, particularly if you're in the classroom and you run on a clam. And clams typically are, again, they're well respected and thoughtful people, but then suddenly they explode. And if you're ever in a classroom, you have a student who's typically very calm and reserved, and suddenly they explode. It is counterintuitive. In fact, it's pretty intuitive to say, hey, this is a good kid who had a bad day. I don't really want to get him into trouble, so I'm not going to send him to the office. We're just going to have a conversation, and then you send him back in the hallway so that he can terrorize others, or she can terrorize others. The truth is, if it takes somebody 6, 7, 8 months to get angry, no matter how articulate you are and how many Dr. Phil books you've read, you can't fix that with a 5-minute conversation or a 5-minute holdback. The way that gets fixed is to hand them off to a professional, an administrator, or a social worker, somebody who has an understanding of the things that they might be trying to deal with, and someone who can provide them and connect them to resources that might help them get better. But what you can't do is ignore it. So as I continue to have this conversation, I also want to be intentional about the language I use. People make decisions based upon their knowledge, their attitudes, and their feelings. Certain language produces certain kinds of feelings. I suggest you use a very conversational tone. Save your $200 words for your dissertation, and save your slang for something else. If you don't use slang every day, and but and it's not part of who you are, and then suddenly you try, it comes off as inauthentic, patronizing, condescending, and it escalates situations. It doesn't de-escalate, right? And so we hired you to be you, so just be you. Don't pretend to be something you're not. And by the same token, if you use an excessive amount of slang, and it is slang that you use every day with your regular conversations, it comes off as very unprofessional. It comes off as very in your face. And so part of the challenge is to stay conversational in your language so that people feel comfortable working with you to find a solution. So again, as I'm working to de-escalate this situation, in addition to being aware to the language I use, being aware of the concerns and motivators that might be in the room, respecting the fact that people are motivated by money, ideology, conscience, and ego, by being intentional about respecting the trigger, understanding the person's goal, trying to find common ground in the goal so I can work with them towards that. In the context of all of that, I also have to remember, and this is very, very important, that all people lie. Latest studies suggest that men lie more than women. I'll leave you to be the judge of that, but what I can say for sure is that all people do lie, and that it's important to understand that as you're dealing with an issue, you can't assume that what everybody says is true. Now, it's also true you can't assume that what everybody says is false either. But my sense is there's a very happy kind of in between there where I don't have to necessarily decide the end of the world to decide, um, if the person's lying right now. But what I can't do is assume they're telling the truth and then add fuel to the fire. Say things like, "Oh, that Mr. Johnson, he's always hurting people's kids. I hope, or those kinds of things." Don't throw your coworkers under the bus. Document concerns that you hear, and at the end of the day, put them in the right hands so they can be investigated and it can be determined. But if you didn't see it yourself, don't assume it to be true. Well-trained professionals are very good at reading body language to determine whether or not a person's being truthful. I advise you not to try that. It can only cause you issues and oftentimes cause things to escalate. However, it is important for you to be aware of people's body language and what it's communicating to you for a number of other reasons. One of those reasons having something to do with their intent. That when people get tired of talking and they're preparing to fight or to become physically aggressive, there's typically a shift in their body language, and their body says, "I'm ready to fight." And clenched fist, clenched teeth, tightness in the shoulders, moving into your body space, changing of a stance to a more aggressive fighting stance, um, and as well as more rapid speech, rapid eye movement. Those kinds of things suggest to you the person's at a tipping point and violence is inevitable. And so you want to be aware of body language for at least that reason. The other reason you want to be aware of it as it relates to what you are communicating yourself personally. That what we know and we understand is that about 7% of what you communicate when you're meeting with someone face to face is the words you choose. The other 93%, is communicated through your nonverbals. 33% through your tone. I'm sorry, 55% through your nonverbals, your facial expressions and your body movement. 38% through your tone, your timbre, your cadence. All those things communicate something extra. There's a difference between saying, "Would you please hand me that bottle of water?" and saying, "Would you please hand me that bottle of water?" Right? And that same words, but the tone. And if you could see me, I was shaking my head when I said it. And the body language suggests that there's some other energy that's there, and that you want to be really intentional about when you speak, that you control your tone, you control your volume, you control the shaking of your head or the moving of your head, you control your hand movements and your body language so that you don't communicate aggression when you don't intend to. And when you communicate aggression unintentionally, once again, it escalates situations and it doesn't de-escalate them. As I said before, body language plays a key role in terms of understanding what you're communicating to the other person and what the other person's communicating to you. With that said, proximity plays a key role in that. You'll see from this slide that that when you barely know someone, typically in these situations we're dealing with strangers, it's appropriate to be 4 to 6 feet away. And when you know someone personally or professionally, we're often 3 to 4 feet away, and we're ultra personal, and we're 18 to 36 inches, which is 3 feet away from someone. Oftentimes, when people become angry, they move themselves closer to you. When they're being aggressive, they move into your space. The challenge for them and for you, based upon that, is because of their proximity, they feel less safe. And that's something people don't know about themselves. Oftentimes, the closer we are to the source of our anger, the closer we are to the source of our vitriol, oftentimes the less safe we feel, the more threatened we feel, and so we need space in order to feel safer. And when you give people space who are there in your face and crowding your space, you actually give them unconsciously permission to feel safer. And so it's always good, whenever possible, to keep furniture between you and the person who's angry or upset. But if you're unable to, you want to keep at least 4 to 6 feet between you, so that even if they decided to hit you, they'd have to lunge to do so. You'd have some space to protect yourself. But the other part of that Two, just in terms of the spacing and staying outside of 4 to 6 feet, is that you want to keep your feet about shoulder width apart. You want to keep your hands in front of you where you can see them. So if necessary, you can defend yourself, but also not moving so much that they are a threat or that you're reaching into other people's space, creating challenges for them. And if you're intentional about controlling your space, and once again, not only do you want to control the distance, but you want to control the angle. It's natural to create kind of a conversational angle when you talk to people. If you just think about when you go to meet somebody at a party or you go to whisper in a girl's ear, you don't stand face to face and square off with her. You actually create a kind of natural conversational angle on the side and speak into her ear instead of into her nose or mouth. And that's kind of the natural conversational way, is to create that angle. But again, when people are angry, they take a very confrontational stance. And what you don't want is for your conversation and your effort to de-escalate to turn into what looks like a staring match between two boxers. That's not the goal. And so you want to create the appropriate angle when having that conversation, which is about a 45-degree angle, and you want to be 4 to 6 feet away from them. In addition to being intentional about your body spacing and how close you are to the subject as you're engaged in this conversation to de-escalate, you also want to be intentional about not boxing the person in or putting them in a position where they're stuck. When people are forced into a box, a number of reflexes take over. They can, you've heard of fight or flight. The person will feel inclined to either fight to protect themselves or to run to get to safety. Occasionally they will attempt to negotiate, or in other circumstances simply submit. In our circumstances, where we're trying to de-escalate, to people in schools where there are a number of children, it's really important that you not put the person in the position where they feel like they have to fight, unless of course that person's a danger to you, yourself, or others immediately. And in which case that's a separate issue. But if I'm trying to de-escalate a situation and a person wants to leave, then I should let them go, unless there's something about their leaving that creates a hazard to others. If they say, well, no, I'm just going to go down the hall and get this teacher myself, well then, okay, yeah, they're a hazard to the teacher. But I mean, assuming that, or to anyone else they might encounter, I should say. But if they just want to leave the building, they just want to get out, they're through talking with you and so forth and so on, and assuming they're of the appropriate age to do so, then yes, you can just let them go. There's no need to force the issue and to create a situation where the person feels like they're in a fight or flight situation, and we end up escalating the situation as opposed to de-escalating. Additionally, when we're trying to de-escalate a situation, it's important to understand that we got to keep our hands to ourselves. That physical contact of grabbing or touching the aggressor is inappropriate and unacceptable, and almost always leads to an escalation of the situation, not de-escalation. And I need you to hear me when I say this, that de-escalation is not a form of restraint, and restraint is not a form of de-escalation. And so we don't de-escalate by grabbing and restraining. We only restrain when de-escalation has been unsuccessful and it's necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare for others. But restraint is not de-escalation, and de-escalation is not restraint, and the two should not be used interchangeably because they're appreciably different. Exiting. After an aggressor is willing to leave the area, never position yourself by the door or follow. The act of submission followed by the physical closeness may reignite the situation. Alright? If you've been successful in de-escalating and the person's leaving, just let it go. One of the challenges of dealing with someone who's engaged in One of the challenges of dealing with an irate, upset, angry, or potentially violent person is typically perhaps having a threatening tone, particularly if they're engaged in cognitive aggression, is that they have a plan. They know what their goal is. They intend to intimidate you to achieve a certain goal. You need to have a goal and a plan too. They're acting and you're reacting. And so part of the way we counter that is that you prepare beforehand. And part of being prepared is just understanding and having a plan for whenever you in conversation or you're working about it. What is my plan for intentional about? Right? Understanding part of being prepared is the way you set up your classroom. Ideally, you want your desk near the door, so that you have as it relates to a couple of things. The first thing near the door. So this is the way you set up your classroom. Or the intercom system, in charge of a classroom, desk. That's part of the way the ideal plan situation prepares you is to have your desk near the door. What you don't want to do is just to be having your desk near the phone, the intercom system. What they're going to do is you not have the desk to deal with them, or the door and when they show up. System or to that end, there are a couple of things I want to talk about a plan, and that's the best case scenario for dealing. That way, when someone comes into the room, you're not with intruders in the door. You can't get out. The other way to do that and set that up dealing with the diversity of our population. So the first piece in case of emergency in the building. Every school in St. Louis public schools has a plan for what happens if close to the door. You're able to get up quickly. And oftentimes there's some kind of call or a bell ringing from the office. Sometimes it's as simple as there's an intruder cover. The other way it's a password. Pays to be prepared. Teachers erase all chalkboards. The diversity. In either case, you should also get to your school yourself as your place of business. Identify what the password is. What the standard approach is. Context of St. Louis public schools. How I get my kids to safety. 80% of our children typically, if the passwords. Teachers erase all chalkboards. Then your job is to get your shade pulled down, to lock your door, get your children out of sight. That's an important piece, but you ought to know that, and you have to be very building specific when you find out what building you're attending. Additionally, get that figured out. The other part of that, 7% of our having a plan for dealing with the diversity of our population, is simply that. Part of the plan is understanding who you're interacting with every day. I told you earlier, we have about 80.7% free or reduced lunch rate. That's pretty high. Nearly 9 out of every 10 children receive free or reduced lunch. Place socioeconomically, and understanding that population is huge. Because in that context, any punishment that causes a child to miss breakfast or to miss lunch is more important and not rooted in relating to the different cultures and respecting their different cultures. Is important too. It's in the wrong place. And you have to be prepared for that. Any solution in this context too on any given day of our 25, 26,000 students on any given day. Where I didn't live around a lot of black people, and 4,200 of those students are homeless. To deal with significant population of people who are concerned about where they're going to sleep tonight, how those might impact the way you see where they slept last night. The way you see people of color. With that understanding, it's really imperative that you have a cosmopolitan culture of all those children I discussed, multiple countries represented. You might want to again wrestle with yourself. What are the challenges black children that my background bring to the table, to this room? They're all easily stereotyped to be aware of my personal challenges. Reflect to make sure that impoverished African American children have treat the people around me. You won't find in suburbs, or at least they don't manifest themselves the same way. And it's important to have a plan around understanding that and respecting that. And that if you can't, then you need to question your willingness to stick with this organization. I'm about to wrap up here, but there's just a couple of things I want to say about this subject, and it's huge. That this is the work of the heart. That you can't do this job if you don't really care about people. And care about young people in particular. And if you haven't, ask yourself the question, do I really love children? Do I really love young people? And come up with a yes. You might really want to reconsider working here, because what I understand and I know to be true, if your heart's not in this work, you're going to fail yourself or fail these children very soon. And so part of your preparation for dealing with this work needs to be a wrestling with yourself and asking yourself the question, do I really care about this? Do I really care about the young people of St. Louis Public Schools enough to give them my all. And if you don't, I really do encourage you to move forward, because this is work you gotta love to do well. And if you do, then I'm excited about having you be part of this team, because I know we're going to make St. Louis Public Schools excellent together. If you're like me and Richard Pryor, your voice when you get excited probably goes up about 8 octaves, and that's always a challenge in terms of what you want to communicate to other people non-verbally or verbally, through tone and inflection. And so you want to be really intentional about controlling your breathing during these times of stress, and be thoughtful. When you're breathing properly, you're getting more oxygen to your brain. You're thinking more clearly. You don't get stuck in kind of tunnel vision. And you're able to kind of see through and process in a way that's healthy. As you're trying to de-escalate situations, again, choice of words is critical. You always want to start with words like I or we, and depending on the circumstances. But what you don't ever want to start with is you. You this, you that, you this, you that. You shoulda, you woulda. If you hadda, none of those things, right? All those things escalate. You want to start with I and with we, never you, and under no circumstances, never, ever, ever, ever you people. As we begin to wrap up, there's some important things that I just need to or emphasize. The first thing is, as you speak, when you're de-escalating, you want to keep your voice firm. The slide says don't hesitate, and I think you don't want long pauses, but it's better to pause a little bit and say the right thing than to feel the need to fill the air with a bunch of words and then say the wrong thing, and to spit out words you're going to have to eat. It's always important to keep your voice low, keep a moderate tone, and because that helps a person achieve active listening. It also helps keep you in listening mode. You should not shout or raise your voice, and even if the other person shouts or raises their voice, you should maintain a low voice. In fact, what I've found is that oftentimes, if they get loud and you get softer, and they get loud and you get softer, eventually they get softer. And if not, then the situation is probably outside of your control, and you should consider, ending the conversation or calling for assistance. The other piece of this that's important as it relates to how we speak is you want to project a calm and controlled demeanor. You never want to be out of control, even if they're excited and they're fired up. You don't need to be excited or fired up. You need to be calm. You need to be the one who's in control of yourself in particular. It's always good to be a great listener and to paraphrase back what they say to you. If they say something to you, and part of the way they know that you're listening is that you give it back to them the way they gave it to you, and you communicate some understanding. Self-control methods are critical. In addition to that, you also want to go out of your way to avoid being judgmental. It's not your job to determine whether or not people are good people or bad people. Your job is to assess the situation and make the choices that are in the best interest of all involved. First and foremost, the children involved, then the safety of the staff involved, and then thirdly, to the academic excellence that's required to take place in the building. So we want everybody to be safe, and then we want everyone to be educated, and all of our choices ought to be connected to that one way or the other. Again, you want to be intentional about not allowing your personal feelings to get in the way. You want to always have a plan for escape from the room. And lastly, in this context or this slide, you want to treat people like you want to be treated. I mean, that's the golden rule, right? Treat people like you want to be treated. This slide's very interesting. It's a challenging slide for me in part because I embrace the truth in some parts of it, and other parts of it are particularly problematic. This slide was prepared for us primarily by the FBI. One of the things they talk about as it relates to people's speech patterns and their kinesthetics is that those things can communicate danger signals to you. If you're trying to de-escalate a situation and suddenly the person begins to be more obscene and their language becomes more and more profane, that's a danger signal. If they become more loud and more obnoxious, that's a danger signal. If their demands become more specific, I said I want it right now. You got 2 minutes. Give me my right. Then that's a danger signal. Threats obviously are danger signals. Rapid eye movement, again, and rapid speech, all danger signals. Additional kinesthetics that matter and impact our posture. If they take a threatening posture, an aggressive stance, or they're constantly moving, they can't stand still, those things are warning signals to you. Those are kinesthetic and speech signals that say, be careful, this person is probably not being de-escalated. For whatever reason, they've reached the tipping point and you're about to have potential violence on your hands. Um, the other thing that's associated with that is a wild look in their eyes, rapid eye movement. They'll speak rapidly, and their eyes oftentimes will be wide open. Eyes just look really big. All those things again are kinesthetic and speech signals that suggest a person's a danger to you. 3 and 4 on this slide, however, are not kinesthetic signals, nor are they speech signals. Yet the FBI chose to put them on the slide for you to see. And I want to suggest to you that these aren't signals. These are stereotypes, and they have no place in this school district, or I would suggest in any workplace. I just told you 3,800 to 4,500 of our students are homeless on any given day. I just told you 88.7% of them receive free or reduced lunch. And so that means, based on the high level of poverty and the homelessness, that occasionally a student or their parents will show up in poorly maintained clothing. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily a danger to you. It just means they're having a bad day. And some of them will show up and they'll have body odor because they didn't get in the shelter and they didn't get a shower last night. Again, doesn't mean they're a danger to you. Just means that they're dealing with some stuff. I could, or you could probably be in a room full of people flashing gang signals and gang signs. And most people have no sense of what those gang signs are or what they mean. Most of us can't tell who's in a gang by looking at them. Just because someone's wearing a do-rag doesn't mean they're in a gang. Just because someone's wearing all blue doesn't mean they're in a gang. All of our custodians wear blue uniforms every day. And I'm pretty sure they're not all Crips. And during the playoffs, most of the city is dressed in red. And I know we're not all Bloods. And so let's leave those stereotypes where they belong, anywhere but at work. They don't help. In fact, what they do is they rob people of dignity and respect. And if we're going to do this well, it's imperative that we treat people with dignity and respect. Lastly, if you sense someone's using drugs, sure, that's something you should be concerned about. You should raise that. We have a policy, a drug-free workplace, about reporting that. But outside of that, the rest of this slide and the kinesthetics sections 3 and 4, those are stereotypes. They have no place in this district. And to use them would rob people of dignity and respect. As we prepare to close, it's important to understand that all these things, these conversations, these issues have civil liability concerns. And it's important to document any kind of negative interaction with a student, staff member, or parent that you think might have consequences down the road. Challenge is for us that oftentimes we have these negative or awkward interactions with people. We don't document them right away, and then our memories around those things become kind of foggy. And when the other person remembers them with great detail, or at least they present it like they remember it with great detail, they tell it from a very different perspective, and we're at a disadvantage. So it's really important to document those kinds of interactions as you are preparing to move forward. Make sure you write it down, and make sure you remember it well, and that you put it in a place that you can have access to it later. Lastly, this slide is from a song written by Earth, Wind, and Fire. The title of the song is Devotion. Most people think of it as a love song, and I guess it does have something to do with love, but not the love of an individual woman, but a love of teachers, a love of people who in our community who are committed to making a difference in the lives of young people. I was allowed to attend and honored to attend a conference in Philadelphia this past week. At the conference, a gentleman spoke of a group, an African tribe, whose tribal greeting to each other was, and how are the children? And then the response of the other person in the tribe, whether they had children or not, was that all the children are well. I think that's an appropriate greeting in a school. That what those of us who would engage in this process of giving ourselves to children and making building a community where teaching and learning were at a high level, have to be asking ourselves the question, and how are the children? And at the end of the day, if we all do our jobs well and we're intentional about making this a district of greatness, and going from a place with pockets of greatness to becoming a place of greatness, that the answer will be, and all the children are well. Thank you for your time. I look forward to seeing you